So we are going to talk about the principal agent model, what you did in the Excel homework, and look at some examples where the principal agent model seems to explain things, and then some reinterpretation of the model, because I think it's interesting to consider that pay for performance isn't the be-all and end-all. So let us begin with extreme forms of compensation. And the first extreme is where the agent or the worker gets a flat wage, which means that the wage doesn't vary with output. And so in particular, from a productivity risk point of view, the worker doesn't bear any of the risk. The principal or the owner of the company absorbs all the productivity risk in this first extreme. In the second extreme, the worker becomes the owner, so you don't need somebody else to be the principal. The worker is both the principal and the agent in one person, and so the worker or owner then absorbs all the productivity risk. These are the two extremes, and let's now consider them from the point of view of the model. If it is optimal to have the low effort solution, that gives the first extreme. The low effort does not require wages to vary by output because that's what the worker would choose if the wages were flat, the low effort solution. So the low effort solution gives flat wages to the agent and has therefore the principal absorbing all the risk. If it is optimal to have the high effort solution, however, then the principal and the agent share the risk. So the main idea of the principal agent model, and we think of the high effort solution as the one to focus on, is it's a model where productivity risk is shared. A risk-averse party, the agent, bears some of the risk for incentive reasons. The risk-neutral party, the principal, still does bear some productivity risk, but not as much as otherwise, because the principal needs to give the agent incentives to take high effort. This solution then is an intermediate form between the extreme forms. And now let's look at some examples. Perhaps the most famous one is with land tenancy. So you have a farmer who does not own the land. The landlord is remote, and the farmer pays for use of the land through sharecropping. And we can think of sharecropping as just a straight fraction of the crop that's paid to the landlord, or we can think of it as a combination of a small rent that is a fixed payment plus a share of the crop. And then you can imagine the bigger the rent, the lower the share, or the smaller the rent, the higher the share. And in that way, you can think about sharecropping as a simple two-part principal agent model. Sharecropping, fairly popular historically. There's some evidence to show that yields on farms go up as the agent bears more of the risk. In fact, if it completely owned the land or paid a fixed rent, then the sharecropper would bear all the risk, and typically productivity increases that way, measured by yield on the land. Sweatshops are another historical example, and from sweatshops we have the expression piece rates. Piece rates refer to cloth that was being produced in the sweatshop, so workers would be sitting at sewing machines making cloth, and each piece would be paid at a certain rate. So there's a pay for performance aspect in that the workers get paid based on their output. Last example of this sort, and all of these are physical labor examples. Picking fruit in an orchard, typically pay is by the bushel of fruit gathered, and so the workers, after they've picked their fruit, will bring them into the shop and have them weighed and then get paid according to how much they've picked. One observation about these examples: the measure of performance is completely straightforward, so it's very easy to see output and therefore to agree on what the performance measure is. And in each of these cases, you can actually count the output. So it's not a qualitative measure, it is a quantitative measure. And the easily counting it makes for pay by performance that much easier. In all the examples, historically, the worker is poor and not well paid overall. So these pay for performance jobs were all low income, which suggests kind of an excess supply situation in the market. And pay for performance in that sense is equated with low income work. Let me give some more current examples. One of those is that a salesperson at many companies receives a percentage of the sale. So to incentivize the sales work, the salesperson keeps a percentage. The company gets the remaining part of the sale. Sometimes lawyers are paid a contingency fee. Let me explain that in a second. Sometimes you pay lawyers a fixed fee for certain tasks that are pretty routine. For example, like drawing up a will, you will pay a lawyer a fixed dollar amount. Sometimes you pay lawyers by the hour, how much they work. But in a contingency fee setting, and you want to think about somebody suing somebody else, the amount the lawyer gets depends on how much money is collected, either by taking the case to court or by settlement. So the lawyer gets some fraction, 10%, 15% of the amount at settlement. This is a way to incentivize the lawyer to work hard on the case, but it's also a risk sharing arrangement. So sometimes a poor client can't afford to pay a flat fee to the lawyer, and taking it on contingency is a way, if they don't collect anything, then the client's not out anything. This example to me is more controversial. Some teachers are paid based on student standardized test performance, and I want to talk about that one a little bit more, because the question is, standardized test performance a good measure of teacher input? And do you end up getting a narrowing of the teaching and teaching to the test as a consequence of that type of compensation? Here's some more examples. Many companies pay year-end bonuses. If the year-end bonus is the same for each worker in a certain category, that's not what we're talking about here. That would be a bonus pay based on how the company is performing. If the bonus varies from one individual to the next based on individual performance, that's more consistent with the principal agent model. CEO pay, the top person at the company, is often tied to stock performance, and so the asset value of the company is used as a measure of how well the CEO is doing. And then you can ask, of course, how that asset value compares to where it was the last quarter, so you can look at growth as the measure rather than just the level as the measure. Sometimes movie stars take a percentage of the gross rather than get all their payment as a fixed payment for making the movie. Famous movie stars are very well to do, and they're probably quite able to have a diverse portfolio, so it makes sense for them to be absorbing some of the risk. In some sense, they become owners, even though they're also employees in the sense that they're starring in the movie, but they're owners in that they are treating this as a capital investment. So here's the question I want students to consider. Is pay for performance overutilized today? By overutilizing, I mean, do too many people who are of low or moderate income bear more income risk than is good for them? It's not just an incentive issue, it's that the risks are not being absorbed by those in the economy who better able to do that. And you typically think that the ability to diversify increases with income or increases with wealth. And this was the teacher example, sometimes we use pay for performance, but the performance measure is not very good or accurate. And as a result, it distorts the work because now you're only exerting effort to where compensation counts, and you're not devoting effort to real productivity things, but where the performance measure is lacking. So because of that critique, here is a reinterpretation of the model that you might find interesting. So in the basic model, we talked about the low effort as shirking and the high effort as taking effort. But instead of that, call the situation either worker autonomy or being micromanaged. Workers prefer autonomy. So autonomy gives higher utility. The only reason then to give micromanagement is presumably it has some productivity benefit. In this case, if the worker is highly risk averse, so the risk premium you would have to pay to get them to absorb risk is very high, or if being micromanaged doesn't increase productivity that much, just not that much better, then the optimum is flat wages and worker autonomy. So the, if you will, solution we didn't focus on earlier when we wanted to actually generate pay for performance, and flat wages doesn't look like pay for performance, can be reinterpreted as flat wages and worker autonomy can often be the right solution to the employment relationship based on the model. This is not based on ad hocery. The model predicts this under the circumstances just described.